have a few stories. First, I'll tell about, maybe you've heard me tell this story before. There was a Jewish guy who brought a Christian friend to a Shabbat morning prayer service. And his friend wanted to know the meaning of many of the rituals. Like, when the rabbi was leading the call to worship, they would bend the knees and bow. And the friend would ask, well, what does that mean? So he would explain, well, it's as though we're standing before a king. And then during the standing prayer, the rabbi would rise up on his toes 3 times, and the friend would ask, what does that mean? He says, well, it's like we're imitating the angels as we praise God. And then it came time for the rabbi to give the sermon about the Torah portion, and he took off his watch, and the friend asked, what does that mean? He said, oh, that doesn't mean anything. I'm going to keep an eye on my watch, though, and hopefully it will. So I want to mention that, yes, it is Father's Day. I'm blessed to have 3 sons, and 2 live in San Francisco, and they'll be coming down to see me later this afternoon. But there's a story about a father with 3 sons. There was a father who left his vineyard to his 3 sons, and after he passed, the 3 sons began to quarrel. The first one said, I am our father's favorite son. And the second one said, no, I am our father's favorite son. And the third said, no, I am our father's favorite son. And they were fighting and bickering, and the entire vineyard went to waste because they could not agree and could not cooperate. Do you recognize the story? That this is one of our history, our religious history, in all 3 Abrahamic faith traditions. And so that brings us to the portion that we read this morning from Genesis 21, and the story of Abraham and his wife Sarah and their son Isaac, and then Hagar, Abraham's concubine, and her son Ishmael. And Sarah felt, whether it was true or not, that Ishmael was mocking them, and maybe her own son, and demanded that Abraham send them away. And so you heard the story, and this story could be seen as the foundational narrative that explains the divergence between the ancestral lines of the Jewish and the Arab peoples. It acts as an ideological origin story, establishing the estrangement of Abraham's 2 sons, Isaac and Ishmael, and the subsequent estrangement of their descendants, which brings us to where we are today. The conflict between Israel and the Palestinian people is one of the longest running and most violent disputes in the world. There have been a series of wars between Israel and Arab nations, and there's been a subsequent Israeli occupation and reprisals and crackdowns, and the consequences of this dispute over land, borders, and rights are still being felt, and include the latest war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Syria, resulting in widespread violence and devastation. The current Israeli government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is widely regarded as the most right-wing and religiously conservative government in Israel's history. Peace is not on their agenda. And while tentative peace frameworks have been established, escalations such as the recent conflict in Lebanon and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz threaten to derail any progress. The U.S. and Iran signed an interim memorandum of understanding aimed at curbing regional tensions and addressing Iran's nuclear program. High-level diplomatic talks in Switzerland involving our Vice President J.D. Vance are underway to solidify these terms into a lasting agreement, but they are threatened by the ongoing Israel-Hezbollah conflict. Iran's primary demand in the Switzerland talks is ensuring calm in Lebanon, but Israel has not agreed to any of the terms in the memorandum, and the Iranian officials repeatedly have paused negotiations or blockaded strategic waterways to protest Israeli strikes in the territory. And so it seems that a 2-state solution is no longer a viable option. Discussions surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict now refer to a 23-state solution, in the context of broader regional peace initiatives. The concept revolves around a comprehensive multilateral approach that involves the existing member nations of the Arab League, 22, plus the Palestinian state, the envisioned Palestinian state. This vision, promoted by advocacy groups like J Street and other regional policy groups, builds upon previous normalization deals like the Abraham Accords. And the core theory is that peace and lasting economic prosperity for Israel and the Palestinians can only be unlocked by integrating a framework that involves a wider regional peace agreement. About 2 months ago, I had the good fortune of going down to Santa Cruz with two of my friends who are here to see two authors who had come to visit on a book tour. Aziz Abu Sarah and Maoz Inon, one Palestinian and one Israeli. They wrote together this book, The Future is Peace. It was the rabbi at Temple Bethel in Santa Cruz, Rabbi Paul Marcus, who had actually brought them together with someone else that she knew who had some experience in writing books and collaborating in this way. And this book is remarkable and has gotten a lot of publicity and is on the New York Times bestseller list and so on. And they begin this book with another story about a father and brothers. Once there were two brothers who lived on opposite sides of a hill. They each inherited half of their father's farmland. One was married with children, the other a bachelor who lived alone. They tilled their own plots of land, and when harvest time arrived, both were blessed with bountiful crops. One night, the younger brother thought to himself, "I have more than I need. My brother has a large family to feed. Surely his need is greater than mine." And on the other side of the hill, the older brother lay in bed thinking, "I have children who will care for me in my old age, but my brother has no one. Surely his need is greater than mine." So that night, each took a sack of grain from his own stores, carried it over the hill, and secretly placed it in his brother's barn. In the morning, they both woke and were puzzled to see their own stores unchanged. Night after night, this exchange continued, until one night, under a clear and starry sky, the brothers met each other coming over the hillside, sheaves of wheat bundled under their arms. In that moment, they understood why their stores had never diminished. The brothers embraced and wept in each other's arms. It's said that it was on this hill, the site of an extraordinary act of brotherly love, that the holy city of Jerusalem was built. Now, the two authors of this book forged a bond of brotherhood when the world expected them to hate one another. They are peace builders, sons of farmers born into a world where the very idea of brotherly love between Israelis and Palestinians was unthinkable. Aziz, the Palestinian, lost his brother in the First Intifada. Maoz, the Israeli, lost his parents on October 7th. Their mutual loss and pain, along with a shared vision of peace, brought them together at a time when the violence of war had pushed them and their families further apart than ever. This story of grace and generosity that I just told is a popular Jewish fable, but its origin is as an Arab folktale passed down through oral history for generations by Palestinian Jerusalemites, and then adopted and adapted later by Jews in the early 19th century. Before there was a conflict between these people, there was a long history of cultural collaboration. But today they are trapped in a hurricane of violence and vengeance that has led to more than a century of bloodshed. The scars of their intergenerational trauma are deep. They are so divided by fear and anger, by extremism and tribalism, that they can no longer see each other's humanity or feel empathy for one another's suffering. They are trapped in the histories handed down to them. But if Israelis and Palestinians are to build a shared future, and they must, for the sake of both both them and for the sake of humanity. The only way forward is to tear down the walls of ignorance and hatred that divide us. Aziz and Ma'on both know the agony of losing those they love most to the conflict. They understand that in the face of suffering and grief, after so many lives have been lost and families shattered, talking about peace can feel irrelevant. When each side believes that the other is a threat to its own existence, talk of peace can feel like a betrayal of one's own people. Wherever we look in the world, we find these growing divides. Today, we are too often sold a vision that leads to more violence, instead of one that leads to harmony and a strategy for lasting peace. I see this book as prophetic, really, and as a testimony to the love that is possible between human beings, even that transcends cultural biases and the grief that becomes so internalized through loss, through violence and conflict. They have been interviewed by countless journalists, including Jon Stewart on The Daily Show, which I highly recommend looking at. And they also met with Pope Francis in 2024 and Pope Leo in 2025. They had such an incredible encounter that Aziz jokes that he had to stop Ma'on from converting. So they both happen to come from a background in tourism. And Aziz began what he called a dual narrative approach to tourism, in which Israeli and Palestinian guides lead tours together as partners, sharing stories and perspectives that offer human context for travelers to understand the immensity of the conflict. And so they have teamed up again and created a tour based on their travels in this book. And I am fortunate to be among several, including my partner and my two friends here, to be going on that trip in October. So I really look forward to reporting back on that trip afterwards. We'll be crossing a checkpoint into the West Bank, an area roughly the size of Delaware, where about 3.3 million Palestinians live under military occupation, and where more than 500,000 Israeli settlers, in defiance of international law, have taken over large swaths of farmland and live in heavily guarded settlements. We'll also visit the important Arab city, the most important Arab city in Israel, the one known as Nazareth, known to Christians as the site of the Annunciation and the childhood home of Jesus. And we'll end our journey in Galilee, where we trace part of the route Jesus walked from Nazareth to Capernaum. The region's history is layered and complex. We will see the remains of a Roman road built for a conquering army, the battle scars left by fallen empires, and a kibbutz built by children of the Holocaust over the ruins of a Palestinian village razed in 1948. Layer upon layer of pain, one trauma built on top of another. If we take nothing else from this story and this journey, let it be these words: the future is peace. They know this because they have visited and worked in former war zones, from Vietnam and Northern Ireland to Rwanda and South Africa, where they witnessed people's capacity to rise out of the wreckage of their trauma and the destruction of war. And they have seen former enemies come together to forge a path of healing and reconciliation. They know that the future of humanity is peace. The only uncertainty is how many more innocent people will suffer before we get there. A lasting peace in Israel and Palestine would send ripple effects around the world and help remind the world that the future will be peace. Together, they are creating a new story, and they do not see themselves as Palestinians or Israelis, or as Jews and Arabs, but as human beings who believe in fostering a culture of dialogue, a culture of forgiveness, a culture of peace. Those who see only division lines, to those who see only division lines, we say, if you must divide us, let it be as those who believe in peace and equality and those who don't yet. I'll close by saying that the story that we read is concluded in Genesis 25, when both Ishmael and Isaac come together to bury their father Abraham. Let that story, let that message, let the message of all peacemakers be with us and remind us now and always that the future is peace. Thank you.
Amen.